Hey everyone, welcome back to the deep dive. We were so intrigued by the stuff you sent over recently. Your personal reflections on education, those articles, those notes, all really got us thinking. Especially your ideas about, well, what really works when it comes to learning, and let's face it, what just totally doesn't.
Yeah, totally.
So in this deep dive, we're going to take all your experiences, the things you highlighted in the sources, and really dig in. We'll try to unpack those challenges you've encountered and see if we can uncover some paths to better, more meaningful learning for everyone.
Absolutely. And what really resonated with us, going through everything you sent, is how your own experiences really connect with these bigger trends we see in education historically and across cultures. It's not just a now thing, and it's not just one kind of learner who feels this way. The struggles you've had, the insights you've come to, they tap into these fundamental questions about how we learn and teach effectively.
For sure. So let's dive into, well, you called it the blah, blah, blah phenomenon. It's such a great way to describe something that I think a lot of people have felt.
Right.
And you mentioned this specific example in your notes. Huge classroom, 42 students. You literally couldn't even hear the teacher. That's like a real, tangible example of just teaching and learning, not connecting.
It's like that sensory overload right from the start. It can be a huge obstacle. One of those articles you sent even talked about that.
Yeah. And what's so interesting is how that feeling, that sense that something's not working, plays out so differently for different people. You're struggling to hear. Maybe there's a shy girl in the back who's having the same problem, but wouldn't dream of speaking up.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And then, like you said, there might be a boy in that same class who's, full of energy. He starts fidgeting, maybe even acting out. It's not that he's trying to be disruptive.
Right.
He's just not engaged. He's getting that blah, blah, blah feeling too, but looks totally different.
Exactly. And if you think about it, like you mentioned in your notes about different ways people learn, a young kid with some kind of auditory processing issue, that classroom noise, even if the teacher's loud, it just turns into this jumble. Right. Or older students, like you were saying, they've heard the same stuff, same dull delivery year after year. They've almost learned to tune it out. It's like a defense mechanism.
Totally. And it's not just the individual learning styles or whatever.
Yeah.
You touch on this in your notes talking about your experiences in different countries.
Yeah.
But culture plays a huge role too.
Oh, absolutely.
Like in some cultures, there's this huge emphasis on respecting authority. So students might be super hesitant to ask questions, even if they're totally lost. They don't want to challenge the teacher.
Yeah.
And then, of course, like you experience firsthand learning a new language, sometimes it's just a straight up language barrier creating that disconnect.
It's really fascinating when you look back historically. Some of those articles you sent about the history of education, they talked about how this isn't really a new thing. Even way back, ancient times, when learning was happening in these big groups, not everyone could grasp what was being taught.
Right.
And you're right. In your notes, you pointed out that the Industrial Revolution, it kind of put this mass education model on fast forward. Big classrooms, the focus shifted to getting as many students through the system as possible. And I think sometimes, maybe unintentionally, that came at the cost of real, deep understanding for each student.
Yeah. And some of that research you sent shows, psychologically, that can have some pretty negative effects, right?
Oh, definitely.
Students get frustrated, start to think they're just bad at learning. The quiet girl gets labeled uninterested.
Unmotivated.
Yeah, or the energetic boy, he's labeled disruptive.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem's not them. It's the environment. It's just not meeting their needs.
Mm-hmm.
And then, it kind of snowballs. These gaps in knowledge build up and it just gets harder.
Absolutely. So this leads to a big question, and it's one you brought up in your reflections. What are some things we can do about it? You talked about how learning in smaller groups was so much better for you. You even suggested a specific number of students, somewhere between 10 and 15. What made that number stand out?
Well, I don't know, it just felt right. That's when I felt like I was actually learning. It seems like when there are fewer students, the teacher can really see everyone, hear everyone. They can pick up on those little things, a confused look, someone who seems lost.
Yeah, those nonverbal cues, that's huge.
And it just feels more interactive. Students can ask questions without feeling like they're holding everyone up. It's just more engaging, more dynamic, which a lot of those articles about teaching, that's what they emphasized.
That makes sense. And when you have that personalized attention, like a lot of those research papers you sent were saying, teachers can start to adjust, even just a little bit, to how different people learn. Some people learn best visually, some through doing things hands-on, others by listening and discussing. smaller class sizes, it just makes it so much easier to see that and respond to it in the moment.
It's almost like going back to a time when tutoring was more common, although like some of that historical stuff you sent reminded us that was usually only for the elite, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
It is interesting to think about how universal education, it's actually pretty new, historically speaking. We're still trying to figure out how to make it truly work for everyone.
Now, this other idea you had, this life subject, this really holistic approach to education, it's something that really caught our attention. Can you tell us more about what you're thinking, especially the specific parts you mentioned?
Yeah, this felt so important to me. Looking back, I just kept thinking, what would have actually prepared me for life, for being an adult? It's about realizing that education, it shouldn't just be about passing tests. It should be about giving people real, practical skills and knowledge to deal with, life's complicated stuff. I was thinking of things like comprehensive sex ed, but not just the biological parts, really covering consent, healthy relationships, how to communicate, the emotional and social side of things.
It's so interesting because, like, some of those cultural studies you son pointed out, while different cultures have different views on sex ed, the basic biological facts and the ideas of respect and healthy relationships, they're pretty universal.
Right.
The challenge, like you said in your notes, is to teach this stuff in a way that makes sense for different ages, that respects different backgrounds, and uses accurate information.
Exactly. And then there's parenthood. It's probably one of the most life-changing things a person can do, but we get almost no preparation for it in school. What if students could do hands-on learning, like even simulations or role-playing, to understand what it really means to raise a child?
Yeah, that's great.
What if they learned about child development? Like some of the research you sent about early childhood education. That stuff's so important.
It all ties into this bigger goal of well-being, right?
Yeah.
And the nutrition and health part you mentioned, it's absolutely essential. Learning to cook healthy meals, understanding food labels, basic nutrition, that stuff can have such a lasting impact on someone's health and their whole life. And again, different cultures have different diets, but our basic nutritional needs, they're pretty much the same no matter where you are. Some of those public health articles you sent, they talked about that.
Exactly. And then the idea of like character development, really focusing on things like integrity, empathy, resilience, responsibility, helping people develop a strong moral compass and those social emotional skills they need to navigate relationships and be good citizens.
If we think about it historically, looking at some of those texts you shared on educational philosophies, this focus on virtue, on character, it's been there in a lot of cultures. Think about traditional stories, proverbs, rituals. They were all about teaching morals and good character. So in a way, it's not a brand new idea, but maybe it's one we need to be more intentional about today.
Yeah. And when you think about the impact of this holistic approach, it's huge. It's not just about getting a job. It's about helping people become well-rounded so they can handle adult life, take care of themselves, take care of their relationships, and contribute to a more informed, responsible society.
Which brings us to that final, really powerful point you made about the transformation that happens when someone moves from that feeling of being lost, overwhelmed by the blah, 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 to actually having access to knowledge and skills they can use. You talked about your own experience with this, and it's really insightful.
Yeah, it's like a total shift. Someone who felt lost, maybe even thought they couldn't learn, suddenly they become confident and empowered. When the information makes sense, when they have skills they can actually use, it changes everything. Like some of the sociological studies you sent, they showed how communities flourish when they prioritize this kind of holistic education because people are more informed, more engaged, more resilient.
And if we look at the big picture, like in those anthropological texts you sent, the ability to share knowledge, to learn from each other, it's always been what drives human progress. From oral traditions to the printing press to the internet, every time we find new ways to access and understand information, society changes in big ways.
So to wrap up this deep dive, we've covered a lot, all thanks to you, your thoughts, the stuff you shared. We looked at the challenges of bad teaching, how that blah, blah, blah feeling affects people differently. We talked about the benefits of small class sizes, personalized attention, and we discussed how important it is to have a more holistic curriculum, one that includes real-life skills alongside those traditional subjects. So people are truly prepared for life.
Yeah. Your insights, the research, the articles, it's given us a lot to think about. It's clear that how we approach education, it matters so much, not just for each student, but for everyone.
And that brings us to a final question for you all to consider. Based on everything we talked about, everything you shared, how might focusing on personalized attention and a holistic approach change what it means to be well-educated? Not just now, but in the future. Think about what that means for you, for the people around you, for your community. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
This is DigitView.